The evening wind carried the scent of dust and mesquite, the kind that clung to the back of the throat and made the silence of the plains feel heavier still. Elias Harper had worked the same stretch of earth for more than a decade, every furrow and fence line known to him as if they were scars etched upon his own skin. He moved with the weariness of a man who did not hope for change and did not expect company. His boots struck the porch with their familiar weight, boards creaking in protest, before he bent to set down his spade against the wall. In the kitchen, the blackened kettle hissed low on the stove, a single sound threading through the emptiness of the house. He poured his coffee slow, hand steady, eyes fixed on nothing. The rocking chair in the corner remained still tonight, though it waited for him as it always did. He had not spoken a word aloud since morning, and that suited him fine. Silence was safer. Silence never left. It was only when he stepped out again to close the barn that he saw her. At first she seemed no more than a shadow moving against the dusk, the horizon still smeared with the red of a dying sun. But shadows did not stumble, did not clutch at their torn shawls with trembling fingers. She came closer, barefoot, the dust clinging to her feet, her face half hidden beneath strands of dark hair. Her voice, when it reached him, was scarcely more than a breath. "Turn your eyes away." The words froze him where he stood. His hand had gone, by old habit, toward the rifle leaning just inside the doorway, but he did not take it up. She lifted her head then, and he saw the bruises blooming faintly along her cheek, the rawness of her hands, the hollow of hunger beneath her eyes. She looked neither wild nor dangerous, only worn thin by some grief greater than the night could hold. Elias said nothing at first. He was a man of silence, and silence had been his armor since the day he buried his wife on the hill beyond the Cartonwoods. But he was not made of stone, not entirely. He saw how the woman swayed where she stood, as if the weight of the air itself might crush her. "You lost." His voice was low, rough with disuse. Her gaze flicked past him, as if she would rather face the emptiness than his eyes. "I've nowhere left to go." Elias held the doorframe, torn between closing it and stepping aside. He thought of the quilt folded in the cedar chest, his wife's quilt, still carrying the faint scent of lavender though the years had washed it nearly away. He thought of how cold the nights were becoming, of how the wolves had been heard nearer to the ridge. And he thought of the way his wife's voice used to press against him like a reminder whenever he strayed from decency. "Don't harden so much, Elias. The world's already cruel enough." At length, he moved aside. "Come in, then." She crossed the threshold as though expecting the floor to give way beneath her. Inside, the lamplight cast long shadows across the walls, catching the dust motes that floated like pale ghosts. Elias set bread on the table, half a loaf gone dry at the edges, and poured water into a tin cup. She took it with shaking hands, drank as if each swallow might be her last. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Clara." The syllables trembled, but they were steady enough to hold her upright. He nodded once. "You can stay tonight." After that, he let the rest fall into the silence. She seemed to understand. Wrapping her torn shawl tighter, she sank onto the wooden chair nearest the fire. The flames reached toward her as though eager for company, but Elias stayed back, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. He watched her shoulders rise and fall with each breath, the exhaustion slowly overtaking her. The house did not change, its walls still held the weight of absence, the rocking chair still waited for a hand that would never return. Yet the air inside felt different, unsettled. For the first time in years, Elias was not alone with his grief. He did not welcome it, but he could not deny it either. Clara pulled the quilt around her shoulders when he finally laid it near the fire, her fingers pressing into its faded stitching. She whispered something he did not catch, perhaps a prayer, perhaps nothing at all. Elias turned his face away, unable to watch her cling to something that had once belonged to another. When the fire burned low, he lingered by the window, staring out into the dark. The land stretched silent as ever, but now the silence felt heavier, broken by the presence of a stranger under his roof. He told himself it was only for the night. Yet deep within, beneath scars he had long ignored, Elias knew the truth. A man does not open his door to the broken and expect his heart to remain untouched. He did not pray. He had not prayed in years. But as he set the rifle across his lap and kept watch by the window, a single thought pressed against him, quiet and unyielding, that sending her back into the night would have been a cruelty even he could not live with. The mornings came cold, the kind that stiffened the air and turned breath into mist above the coffee pot. Elias Harper rose before the first rim of light, as he always had, boots heavy against the boards, shoulders bent to the day. Yet now, when he entered the kitchen, there was another sound, the rustle of fabric as Clara gathered the quilt closer, her hair falling loose from sleep. She would not meet his eyes, not fully, but she whispered thanks when he set the bread between them. Her presence unsettled the rhythm he had built from solitude. The quilt she wrapped around herself had once lain folded in cedar, untouched since the day his wife was lowered into the earth. Now its faded stitching returned to the firelight, its threads pressing against the shoulders of a stranger. He told himself it was only a scrap of cloth, yet the sight struck him with a sharpness that left his chest hollow. He caught himself watching her when she thought herself unseen. At night, by the fire, Clara sat with a comb in hand, drawing it through the dark weight of her hair. She would braid it slow, her fingers deft, as the flames cast her face in shifting light. The braid stirred a memory he had buried deep, the way his wife once plaited her hair on summer nights, humming softly, a tune that had long since faded from the air. Elias turned his gaze away each time, but the memory clung to him like the smell of smoke in cloth. Clara watched him too. She noticed the scars along his hands, silver lines that cut across knuckles hardened by years of labor. She heard the rocking chair creak at midnight when he could not bring himself to sleep, his shadow long against the wall. She never asked what thoughts drove him from rest, though her eyes carried their own quiet questions. It was in stolen fragments that the past began to surface. Clara's story came in broken strands, spoken not as confession but as fact. Her husband had died in a border skirmish, a bullet striking him down before her very eyes. The town where she sought refuge turned against her, whispering that she carried misfortune, that her presence drew death. One night they cast her out with nothing but a torn shawl and a ribbon cut from her wedding dress. She had walked until her feet bled, until the horizon blurred, until she stumbled into Elias's land. Elias offered little in return, but silence did not always hold. Once, when the wind pressed against the windows, he spoke of the hill where the cottonwoods grew, of a grave beneath their branches. His wife had died giving life, and the child had not lived long enough to be named. Since then, the house had stood as a tomb, its walls heavy with the weight of all he would not speak. Clara listened, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes lowered in reverence rather than pity. The days passed in uneasy rhythm, Clara stitching torn fabric with patient hands, Elias repairing fences, his figure stark against the horizon. When they crossed paths in the doorway, their shoulders brushed but neither lingered. At dusk they sat by the same fire, yet carried the silence between them like a burden neither could put down. Still, something had shifted. The house no longer echoed with emptiness alone. The air carried the faint cadence of shared breath, the rustle of fabric, the scrape of a chair being drawn close. It was not warmth, not yet, but it was no longer the chill of an abandoned tomb. Clara began to understand that survival was not only a matter of food or shelter, but of endurance, the patience to remain in the presence of another's silence without fleeing from it. Elias, though he did not speak it, began to realize that his grief was no longer solitary. Another carried her own shadow, and together those shadows altered the shape of the house. The rocking chair still creaked at night. The quilt still bore the faint lavender of another woman's hands. But beneath those echoes of the dead, there was the faintest pulse of the living, fragile, reluctant, yet undeniable. The storm came in sudden, heavy sheets, the kind that swallowed the horizon and turned the air into a curtain of grey. By nightfall the rain struck hard against the windows, rattling the panes like stones in a tin. Elias set another log on the fire, the heat fighting against the damp that crept into the house. Clara sat close to the flames, her shawl drawn tight, her face pale in the flicker of light. The sound of thunder seemed to hollow out the room, making every silence between them heavier. It was near dusk when the horses' hooves cut through the storm, muffled but steady, coming up the long trail toward the ranch. Elias rose at once, the weight of his rifle settling naturally into his hand. Few rode out in weather like this, and fewer still without purpose. He opened the door to the sight of a rider, broad-shouldered beneath a slick coat, water streaming from the brim of his hat. The man swung down, boots splashing mud, and knocked once against the doorframe before Elias could speak. "Evening, Harper," the man drawled, voice roughened by the road. "Didn't expect to find you playing host." His gaze slid past Elias, settling on Clara like a knife finds its mark. Her breath caught sharp. "Jonas." The name seemed to draw the storm in closer. Elias's eyes narrowed as he stepped aside, rifle angled though not raised. The stranger entered with the ease of a man who had long ago stopped asking permission. He shook the rain from his coat and smiled without warmth. "Didn't figure I'd find you here, Clara. Not after all that talk in town. Folks said you'd vanished." Clara stood, one hand braced against the chair, her voice thin but steady. "I told you once, Jonas. I wanted nothing more from you. Nothing more from any of it." Jonas laughed low, though there was no mirth in it. "That so? Strange, seeing you under the roof of a settler. Strange how quick you take to their tables, their fires." His words carried weight, half accusation, half threat. "Your husband would turn in his grave, thinking of you like this." The fire cracked, loud in the silence that followed. Elias's grip on the rifle tightened, his gaze fixed on Jonah's. Yet doubt pressed against him too. He had taken Clara in blind, never asking beyond her name, never demanding proof of the past she claimed. The storm outside pounded harder, a mirror to the unease building in the room. Clara lifted her chin, though her hands trembled. "My husband is in his grave because of men like you. Men who carried rifles into border towns and left widows in their wake. Do not speak his name." Jonas's smile faded into something colder. "You've debts, Clara. Blood debts. You can't outrun them by sitting by another man's fire." Elias stepped forward then, the rifle rising just enough to remind Jonas he was no guest, no friend. "That's enough. You've made your point. Time you rode on." The drifter's eyes flicked between them, stormlight flashing across his face. For a long moment he seemed ready to push further, but at last he shrugged, drawing his coat close. "I'll ride on. But don't think she's free of what's owed. You shelter her, Harper, you take on her shadows too." The door slammed behind him, the storm swallowing the sound of hoofbeats as he vanished into the dark. Inside, the silence throbbed heavier than the thunder. Clara sagged back into the chair, hands pressed against her face. Elias stood over her, torn between anger and suspicion, between the instinct to protect and the gnawing edge of doubt. That night, long after the fire had burned low, Elias rose from the rocking chair and found Clara kneeling by the window. Her hands were clasped tight around a strip of faded ribbon, the only piece of her wedding dress she had saved. Her lips moved in a whisper, a prayer carried softly into the storm. Lightning split the sky, throwing her shadow long against the wall. Elias lingered in the doorway, the rifle still in his hand, his jaw tight with questions he did not ask. For the first time, he understood that Clara was not only chased by grief but hunted by men who would not let her rest. The storm outside raged on, but within him another storm grew, a battle between trust and doubt, between opening his door wider and barring it shut. The days after Jonas's visit stretched long and taut, like wire strung too tight. The storm had passed, but its shadow lingered, leaving the air in the house restless and charged. Elias said little, though his eyes followed Clara more closely now, not with trust, but with the wariness of a man measuring danger. Still, he did not send her away. She rose with him in the mornings, the quilt drawn around her shoulders, and together they sat at the table while the kettle hissed. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the scrape of cutlery and the creak of wood settling in the cold. Coffee steamed in tin mugs, but neither warmth nor ease reached across the space. Clara began to shape herself into the rhythms of his life, offering her hands where she could. She followed him to the fence line, steadying the posts while he drove the hammer. She learned the path to the barn, coaxing milk from the cow with a patience that surprised him. At night, she stitched his torn work shirt, her needle pulling threads together with quiet precision. Each gesture was small, ordinary, but the air between them made it heavy, for though Elias accepted her help, suspicion lay just beneath his silence, like a splinter he refused to draw. Nights bore the sharpest edge. Clara would lie near the fire, eyes fixed on the rafters, listening to the sound of boots pacing the floor. The rocking chair creaked when Elias could not find sleep, its rhythm steady, almost mournful. The rifle leaned always within reach of his hand, a reminder of the danger pressing against their walls. She knew he was guarding her, but part of her wondered if he was guarding himself from her as well. Yet in those days of unease, something softer stirred, unspoken and fragile. Elias caught himself watching her when she braided her hair by the fire, her fingers weaving strands with the same patience she carried in every task. She hummed under her breath sometimes, low and steady, the hymn of a life she had lost. The sound filled the silence without crowding it, and he did not tell her to stop. Clara, in turn, saw more than he meant her to. She noticed how he lingered by the window when dusk fell, his silhouette rigid as he scanned the horizon, ensuring no rider approached. She saw the way his jaw tightened when the wind carried faint sounds across the plain, how he set his hand near the rifle as if prepared to rise. She understood then that beneath the hardness of his silence was vigilance, a man's refusal to let danger cross the threshold again. Under the same roof, their breaths mingled, though their words did not. It was a crucible, the walls of the house pressing them closer, the world outside turning sharper, the past each carried weighing heavier with each passing day. Clara did not press him for answers, nor did he ask her for truths she could not bear to speak. Still, when her eyes caught his across the room, She found in him not only suspicion but something quieter, the faint, reluctant flicker of reverence. Elias did not name it. He could not. To name it would be to betray the dead, to break the silence that had kept him whole these years. But he felt it all the same. Clara's strength was not in defiance, nor in argument, but in endurance, the quiet courage to remain even when unwelcome, to work without praise, to sing softly into emptiness until the emptiness shifted. The firelight drew shadows across the walls, the rocking chair swayed, the rifle gleamed faintly where it leaned. Danger prowled beyond the land, and mistrust lingered within it. Yet beneath those layers of tension, something else began to live, not safety, not yet, but the fragile shape of belonging, born in silence and sustained in endurance. The sun bled low across the horizon when the riders came. Dust rose around them like smoke, and their rifles caught the dying light, steel glinting sharp against the vastness of the plain. Elias had been mending the last of the corral boards when he heard them, hooves pounding steady, too many for chance. He set down the hammer, his hand finding the rifle leaning against the post. From the porch, the rocking chair swayed where he had left it moments before, its motion slow, as though it knew the stillness would not last. Jonah's Hale led them, hat pulled low, his grin sharp as the edge of a blade. He reined his horse just shy of the porch, his men fanning out behind him. The air carried the smell of dust and sweat, thick with the promise of violence. "You've kept her," Jonas called, his voice carrying easily. "Didn't figure you for a fool, Harper. She's got blood on her hands, and you'll have it on yours if you keep her hid." Elias stood at the threshold, rifle steady in his grasp. His face betrayed nothing, though his jaw worked tight. Behind him, he heard Clara's steps, light against the floorboards. She came to stand in the doorway, her shawl clutched close, her eyes fixed not on Jonas but on the ground before her. "You know it ain't true," she whispered, though the words were more for herself than for the men waiting beyond the fence. Jonas leaned forward in the saddle, eyes burning with triumph. "Ambush on the border road, 3 men dead. Who else but her? She's been drifting since her man fell, carrying bad luck like a plague. Folks want her brought to account, Harper. You hand her over, and we'll leave your land in peace." Clara's breath shook. She stepped forward, past Elias, her face pale beneath the gathering dusk. "He's right," she said softly. "Wherever I go, ruin follows. Better it end here than burn through another man's life." Elias shifted, his body cutting off her path. His voice, when it came, was harder than the rifle's steel. "No one under my roof is taken by force." Jonas's grin faded. The men shifted in their saddles, rifles rising with the slow inevitability of thunderheads gathering. "Then you've chosen your place," Jonas said. The first shot cracked, echoing across the plain like a hammer striking stone. Elias fired back, the sound deafening at such close quarters. Horses screamed, men shouted, and the yard erupted in chaos. Fire sparked as a lantern shattered against the barn, flames climbing fast, smoke billowing thick. The red of the setting sun mixed with the fire's glow, painting the land in blood and ash. Elias fired again, ducking behind the porch post as splinters flew. Clara pulled at his sleeve, her voice breaking against the roar. "They'll kill you for me. Let me go." But he did not yield. He rose into the open, the rifle cracking again, his silhouette cut against the firelight. A bullet grazed his side, tearing cloth and flesh alike. He staggered, hand pressing the wound, and Clara caught him as he fell back into the shelter of the house. The barn roared behind them, timbers cracking, smoke choking the air. Clara pressed both hands to Elias's side, her palms slick with his blood. Her shawl slipped from her shoulders as she pressed harder, tears streaking her face. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her voice fierce where once it had been timid. Outside, the riders broke, some dragging Jonas back as fire threatened to consume the yard. Their shouts carried into the distance, fading with the thunder of retreating hooves. The flames roared higher, but the house held, its walls blackened by smoke yet unbroken. Elias's eyes opened, his breath rough but steady. He looked at Clara not as a burden to bear, nor as a stranger intruding on his silence, but as the only soul who mattered beneath that sky of fire. She met his gaze with trembling defiance, her hand still pressed to his wound, her face streaked with soot and grief. In that moment, the world narrowed, no men, no rifles, no curses whispered by townsfolk. Only 2 lives, bound by loss, now bound by fire and blood. Not protector and burden, but 2 souls standing together against the cruelty of the plains. The barn collapsed with a final crash, sparks spiraling into the night. But inside the house, by the light of the dwindling fire, Elias and Clara held fast, the silence between them no longer empty but charged with something that had survived flame and fury. Snow fell soft across the plains, burying the scars of fire and gunshot beneath a clean white silence. The barn lay in ruins, its blackened beams jutting from the drift like broken ribs, yet the house still stood. Smoke no longer curled from its chimney in anger but in steady warmth, marking a place where life endured. In town, tongues wagged as they always had. Some swore Clara had bewitched Elias, others said Harper had gone soft, a man willing to risk his land for a widow cursed by death. But Elias did not ride into town to answer them, nor did Clara. They let the gossip roll on the wind, as useless and fleeting as snowflakes that melted on the hand. Winter settled heavy, days short and nights long. Elias moved more slowly with his wound, though it healed well under Clara's watch. She kept him seated when he would rise too soon, scolded him when he reached for the heavier chores. Yet there was no bitterness in her voice. She fetched water, mended fence posts, and sat with him when the long nights stretched too wide. By the fire, their rhythm shifted. She stitched his torn shirt, the needle clicking in and out of the fabric, and he sharpened her old scissors on the whetstone, the scrape steady and deliberate. Two lives once frayed now found new purpose in the simple act of care. His wife's quilt no longer hung untouched in the chest but lay across their knees, the weight of grief eased by shared warmth. On Christmas Eve, with the snow whispering against the shutters, Elias rose from his chair and went to the chest at the foot of his bed. Clara watched as he knelt, his hands slow and reverent. When he returned, he carried something wrapped in linen, worn soft with years. He laid it gently on the table before her and unwrapped it, a wedding dress, yellowed slightly with time but unmarked by use. Clara's breath caught. Her hands hovered above the fabric but did not touch. The room was quiet save for the crackle of the fire, its light flickering across Elias's face. He spoke at last, his voice low, steady, carrying more than words. "It was hers," he said. "She never wore it. I kept it, because I couldn't let go. But I won't give it as a claim. Only as a choice." Clara's eyes brimmed, her shoulders trembling as though the weight of every exile, every cruel whisper, every night of loneliness had come to rest in that moment. She pressed her hand to her mouth, not from sorrow, but from the sharp ache of being seen. Tears fell freely, landing dark on the pale fabric. "No one ever asked me what I wanted," she whispered. Elias's gaze did not waver. "Then you'll have that now." She reached at last, her fingers brushing the cloth, reverent and unsure, as if it were fragile enough to break beneath her touch. Her tears did not speak of despair but of dignity restored, of a woman no longer marked by curse or pity. The days that followed were quiet, the snow thick upon the plains. When the new year broke, Elias saddled his horse and brought forth another for Clara, one gentled over weeks with his hand. She stood in the yard, breath pluming in the cold, and laid her palm against its neck. The animal nickered softly, as though recognizing her. Together they rode out, the sky wide and pale, the land endless before them. The town waited in the distance, roofs sharp against the snow. They did not ride as husband and wife, not yet. But neither did they ride alone. Elias glanced once at Clara, her shawl drawn tight, her eyes fixed forward. She met his look and gave a small, steady nod. It was enough. The wind bit, the snow swirled, but two figures rode side by side across the vast plain, not shadows clinging to loss, but lives turning at last toward the living.